In the summer of 1881, a farmer working a field outside Rockville, Indiana, found a boy. Not a runaway, not a lost child from a nearby town. A boy, around 12 years old, barefoot, wearing clothing no one could identify, speaking fluently in a language that no linguist, no professor, no expert brought in from Chicago or Indianapolis could place in any known family of human speech. They documented it, they debated it, and then, within months, the story stopped. The newspapers moved on, the academics went home, and the boy himself vanished from every record that should have contained him. That's where most people who know this case leave it. A curiosity, a footnote, an unsolved mystery from the 19th century. But there's a question buried inside this story that nobody has seriously asked. Not who he was, not what language he spoke. Who decided to stop looking, and why did it work so perfectly? Because the search didn't just fade, it was closed, abruptly, with a result that doesn't look like a dead end. It looks like a locked door. Today we're going to find out what was on the other side of it. To understand how a child could vanish from every official record in 1881, you need to understand how the American guardianship system actually worked at that time, because it didn't work the way we tend to assume. In 1881, the United States had no unified federal system for tracking children without families, no centralized registries, no mandatory documentation when a child was transferred from one caretaker to another. What did exist was the orphan train movement. Between 1854 and 1929, somewhere between 150,000 and 200,000 children were relocated through this program, from cities to farming families across the Midwest and West. Children were renamed, their origin stories were rewritten, or simply never recorded. The families who received them didn't always file legal paperwork.
The system was built with genuine intentions to move destitute children off the streets of New York City and into new homes. But it created something else. It created a mechanism for perfect disappearance. A child with no established origin, no family, no documents, entered that system and came out with a new name in a new state, with no thread connecting them to who they had been before. Now let's come back to the Indiana field boy. He was found in Park County. Newspapers covered him. Academics examined him. That meant he existed publicly, too publicly to simply be discarded without process. But public existence did not mean legal protection. In 1881, a child with no established origin, speaking a language local authorities couldn't understand, with no family to claim him, was legally invisible. He could be placed in any institution, transferred to any state, renamed. And all of this could happen without producing a single document that was required to be preserved. Researchers who attempted to trace his subsequent path through Park County archives found nothing. 0 records in orphanages, 0 in guardianship court documents, 0 in church registers. That doesn't look like natural forgetting. That looks like someone understood. This child was not supposed to leave a trail. Let's return to the language, because this is where the official explanation falls apart fastest. The official account, the one that still appears in historical databases today, is this. The boy was a feral child, raised in isolation, who created his own private language. That explanation sounds plausible, right up until you know one fact about how language actually works. Language cannot be invented alone. This is not a theory. It is one of the most thoroughly documented findings in linguistics and developmental psychology. Children raised in genuine linguistic isolation, complete isolation, without human speech contact, do not produce grammatical languages. They produce sounds, perhaps consistent sounds for specific objects, but not syntax, not morphology, not reproducible phoneme combinations that remain stable across sessions. And the Indiana field boy had exactly that. One of the linguists who examined him noted that the boy used the same words for the same things across multiple separate sessions. That means one thing. The language had a source, a living source, a community of people who spoke this language and who passed it to this child. Now, about the language itself. The phonetic structures the boy used included sounds found in known languages, but combined in patterns that appear in none of them. That's an important detail. It doesn't mean the language was invented. It means it belonged to a tradition that left no comparative material. There is a precedent in linguistics. Basque, the language isolate of northern Spain and France, belongs to no known language family. Researchers spent a century and a half trying to find its relatives, still without result. But Basque survived. It had speakers. It had territory. It had a written record. What if there was a language that had none of those things left? What if the only living speaker in 1881 was a 12-year-old boy in a field in Indiana? There's one more angle to this story that almost never gets discussed. Geography. The boy was found in Park County, Indiana. That is not a random point on a map. Indiana sits within the Ohio River Valley, and the Ohio River Valley is home to the most puzzling and least explained archaeological tradition on the continent. The mound builder cultures, the Hopewell and Adena earthworks, some dating back to 100 BCE, demonstrate a level of mathematical precision and astronomical alignment that doesn't fit comfortably into the standard academic story of simple, pre-contact societies. The Newark Earthworks in Ohio, a system of mounds covering roughly 10 square kilometers, an octagon, a circle, causeways, laid out with an accuracy that required sophisticated geodetic calculation. Who built them is officially known. The Hopewell culture. It disappeared around 500 CE, but here is the question that rarely gets asked. Did it disappear completely? When European settlers arrived in this region in the 18th and 19th centuries, they found land that official history described as nearly uninhabited. Scattered nomadic tribes, no substantial settlements. But the reports of early surveyors say something different. People living in isolated communities deep in the forests. Groups that had no contact with neighboring tribes. Languages that didn't resemble anything familiar. Those reports didn't make it into the official history. They fit too uncomfortably into the narrative of empty land awaiting civilization. The Indiana field boy appeared in exactly this region. At exactly the moment when the last isolated communities of this territory were being absorbed into an expanding America. Here is what we know with certainty. In 1881, in Park County, Indiana, a boy of approximately 12 was found. He was physically healthy, which rules out extreme isolation. He spoke a structured language, which rules out private invention. He responded to social cues, which confirms he was raised within a community. And he responded to geometric shapes with recognition, which points to cultural memory. The official feral child classification contradicts every single one of those observations. After the initial documentation, he vanished from every archive, completely. In a region where a massive system for relocating and erasing the paper trail of children was operating at full capacity. His language was never identified, not because the researchers were incompetent, but because, if you take their own notes seriously, it didn't belong to any surviving tradition. What does that mean? It means that if a community stood behind his language, that community no longer existed in any form that could leave a record by the time he was found. The boy spoke. Nobody listened in the way that mattered. His language was documented and lost. His origins were investigated and closed. His trail was followed to the point where someone decided it should go no further. The next question is not who he was. The next question is where the record the linguists made actually went. Because they made one. Phonetic transcriptions, comparative tables, working notes from the experts who traveled from Chicago and Indianapolis. Those materials exist somewhere, in a university archive, in a private collection, in a drawer that hasn't been opened in 140 years. In the next part, we go looking.